This video will discuss the relationship between abstract theory and concrete practice in ethical decision-making. There are a number of different reasons that you might be sitting around thinking about an ethical situation or ethical theory. You might yourself be involved in some kind of situation where you're trying to make a difficult ethical decision. In that case, you would understand all the complexity of that situation intimately from the inside because it's about you. But you could also be talking about a concrete case when it belongs to someone else, someone maybe you know well, a friend, and that person is asking you for advice. Another reason you might be discussing an ethical situation could be that you're commenting about someone else's situation, someone you don't even know. In all three of these cases, you're talking about concrete individuals in the world, and you have varying levels of knowledge of the situation itself. So you can see that as we move down this list, you know a little bit less about the specifics of each case. However, we can become even more abstract in the way we think and talk about ethics when we discuss ethical values or ethical principles. Let's say, for example, that you believe the golden rule, which says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is the best way to handle any situation. When you say, I think that's an important rule, you're talking about a principle that you believe should guide your ethical decision making. There's a huge difference, though, about talking about the golden rule as opposed to talking about these specific cases. The golden rule is intended to apply to any case, in any situation. Knowing or not knowing the specific details of any individual case really doesn't matter when you're talking about the principle itself. If it is right to do unto others as you would have them do unto you when you're talking about your own situation, it's also right for your friend or for the people you do not know. But we can become even more abstract. We can discuss and think about the basic concepts that make our principles make sense. It's kind of the background or foundational concepts within which our principles and values emerge. For example, if I believe that doing unto others as I would have them do unto me is a good idea, I am assuming, whether I know it or not, that we are all very much the same. I have a philosophy about human nature that claims that all humans are basically motivated by and enjoy and appreciate the same kinds of things. That way, if that's true that we're all very much the same, when I'm considering what to do in relationship to you, I think, what would I want in that situation? And knowing that we're very much alike, I know that what I want is basically what you want, and so I treat you the way I would like to be treated. So you might find yourself late at night, drinking coffee, chatting with friends, discussing philosophy, and considering whether or not all humans are basically motivated by the same things and appreciate the same things. That conversation may not even sound like it's about an ethical situation or ethical thought at all, but it's an important part of thinking about ethics to consider these larger philosophical concepts that provide the general worldview in which our values and principles make sense. And then those values and principles are used in the concrete situations we discuss. But all of that I've just said is extremely academic. Let me give you a concrete example so that you understand what I'm talking about here. Let's say that you're in moral philosophy and it's getting towards the end of the semester and you haven't written a big paper that's due and you're a little stressed out. You might consider buying a paper off the internet. It may be, however, not you that's in this situation, but your roommate. Last, you might hear about someone else in your moral philosophy class who faced the same decision. In all three of these cases, we are dealing with cases, specific individuals in real situations in the world. But I want to underscore the fact that in the first one, when it's you know the class, you know what the assignment requires, you understand whether the professor uses turnitin.com or not, you understand the professor's personality, maybe how approachable she is or how distant she is. There are a lot of factors that are part of that decision-making process, and you know it all because it's about you. As we move through these 3 examples I have for you, you see that you get further and further from the situation, and you don't have all that information. Yet they're all concrete situations in the world. So let's say that as you're considering this, you think about values and principles and realize that it's important to you that each person does their own work. You use this value and principle in other places in your life, so you're going to use it here to make the decision about buying this paper. That principle would apply to all 3 of the cases that I've already outlined, because when we get to the level of values and principles, we're becoming more abstract, more general, and more universal. If you were to have a discussion about that principle, you might realize that there's other options and have an interesting philosophical discussion about the difference between individual effort and cooperative effort. And you feel, if you accept that principle, that individualism is more important than cooperative effort. So there again, that's where you're thinking about this general worldview in which your principle makes sense. And you're talking about concepts that have become so abstracted from specific cases that you don't even realize at that point that you're talking about ethics at all. However, those concepts are important in deciding on what ethical principles you will follow. So we have all these different levels that we think about when we think about ethics. In our textbook, MacKinnon and Fiala use the image of a ladder to illustrate these levels. They call all 3 of those first examples I've given you instances of ethical judgment, and they are all ethical judgment. I have added a twist to their ladder by pointing out that even on the level of concrete cases where we're making ethical judgments, there are varying degrees of knowledge we have. I just wanted to point that out so that we will remember as we go through the semester that when you're talking about a situation that you are not a part of, you need to work hard to find out how the people who are in the situation view the situation, what pressures they're under, what information they have access to, so that you can make a judgment with all of that information in mind. But all of these are concrete situations in the world, cases. And when you make a decision about a case, like you make a decision about Charlie Gard, you're making an ethical judgment. The next level up for MacKinnon and Fiala is the ethical principle. And last, they call the highest level ethical theory. You'll find an illustration of this latter on page 11 of the text. So let's talk about these in a specific example. You can start on either end of this ladder. So we're going to start at ethical theory down at the bottom there and move from ethical theory to ethical principles. Once we've developed a principle based on the basic concepts we've accepted, we'll make a judgment about the case. The case is still, should you buy a paper to pass a class? Let's say that in general, in your worldview, you believe that the most important thing in life is personal success, that each person is working as hard as she or he can to get that great job, climb the corporate ladder, get a wonderful home, have a great family, a really nice life full of everything, and that the goal of life is to work towards the most perfect image that you can come up with of personal success. You might, based on that worldview, that it's about having that job, having the title, having the fame, having the house, believe that the ends justify the means. The goal is to get there. And it doesn't matter how you do it, just that you do win. If that's the case, this person would decide to buy the paper. In the end, what's important is that you get an A in moral philosophy, that you have a good GPA when you graduate from Lemoyne College, and that you translate that good GPA into an amazing job and continue to move towards personal success. So here's an example where someone began with theory and worked their way down to the judgment. We can, however, do it the other way around. Let's say that you're making an ethical judgment about buying the paper, and you're sitting there in your dorm room, and everything in you just says, this is wrong. I just can't do this. When you have those feelings, that initial reaction to a case or situation, you can explore them and think for yourself, why? Why is it that I just don't feel good about buying this paper? There you move from judgment to principle and may realize that for you it's really important to obey the rules that society gives us. And you know that this is against the rules, and therefore it feels wrong. Now you want to ask yourself, why is obeying the rules a good rule? What other concepts must I believe in to make that principle make sense? When you do that, you move from principle towards theory. In this case, this hypothetical person realizes that she believes that social rules are good in and of themselves. Every society must come up with some kind of rules to order relationships and keep everybody together and cohesive. And once they've chosen those rules, if everyone follows them, the society runs well. If that's her worldview, her principle makes sense. And if that's her principle, buying the paper is wrong. So she doesn't buy it. But I want to point out that these different ways of thinking up and down the ladder can be different for different people. Right next door to this young lady is a gentleman who also doesn't want to buy that paper. He's uncomfortable, doesn't like it. But when he sits down and starts thinking about why it is that he does not want to buy that paper, he realizes that he feels like he's kind of cheating himself out of an experience. There is an intrinsic good to every activity, he believes, and that is the point of the activity. What do I mean by an intrinsic good? The two words intrinsic and extrinsic are fairly self-explanatory. Intrinsic means inside, so it has that in it, and extrinsic means outside or after the fact. When you write a paper, you go through the experience of writing it, and hopefully you learn, you grow, you have great realizations. That is the intrinsic experience of writing the paper. When it's all done and you hand it in, there is an extrinsic reward, a grade. Maybe it's an A, which is a wonderful extrinsic reward. Maybe it's a C, but that is the extrinsic effect of the paper. Intrinsically, it's the experience of having written it, of growing and learning and thinking, that is the point of the activity. This gentleman believes that the intrinsic experience is more important than any extrinsic effects that you get from it. He might even be the kind of person who would sit down and think through some ideas and write them down, even when he's not assigned a paper at all in any classes. He just thinks it's important to do these activities. He realizes that stressed as he is and rushed as he is, he's going to miss something if he buys the paper rather than writing it. So he decides he won't buy the paper. But you might ask him, why do you think intrinsic goods are so important? And as he unpacks that, he realizes that his overall view of human life is that we're here on this planet to become the greatest version of ourselves we can be. It's a little different than the personal success that the previous hypothetical person was aiming for. He wants to develop himself towards goodness. And writing a paper may make him learn something and in a small way move him in that direction. This gentleman probably won't buy the paper either, but for very different reasons than the young lady on the previous slide. Notice that you can go up and down this ladder in different ways. Notice another thing is that sometimes when you go up the ladder, you may find out something about yourself that you didn't realize and maybe don't like. The young lady on the previous slide who realizes she believes that the ends justifies the means may be a little uncomfortable when she starts thinking about some of the crazy things people have used as means to achieve their goals and want to rethink her decision. We're going up and down the ladder, moving back and forth from your feelings up to your principles and up to your basic concepts. Then from your basic concepts to your principles and back down to the judgment can help you work out an ethical framework that works for you. This is what we're going to do all semester long.